My brick is now rust-free and it has tires that fit, but it's still quite ugly. Let's get into it. Now, if you're just joining us, this is my 1983 Volvo 245 that will soon be a turbodiesel 5-speed lifted safari type thing. Now, we're not going to take care of all the ugliness in this video, but there are a few big ugly things I want to get sorted today. In case you're a bit hard to see in, such big uglies include the rear quarters that are still a mess because I suck at welding sheet metal. Slightly north of that, there's some rust creeping through the rear quarter window gaskets. Similarly, on the tailgate, there's some nastiness up top and also by the wiper arm. Back up at the bow, or lack thereof, the engine bay still looks like this. There's also a bunch of holes all over it that I want to get rid of before I start bodywork. But I guess that constitutes starting bodywork. Let's start here, because that's what I'm most tired of looking at. If you aren't here for that video, I want big tires, but 240's have teeny tiny rear arches. So I make arch bigger, but I also make mess up here. I did get this thingy. It is a spot welder slide hammer doohickey, and using this and some torch shrinking, I was able to get this vaguely flat. But I still need to get behind it with a dolly to planish it out. Now, unfortunately, my arms aren't quite long enough for that, but there is a big hole in the car here. I reckon I'll be able to reach down through to get a dolly behind that. Unfortunately, it's still full of window, but as I mentioned, that's coming out anyway. So just kidding, let's actually start there. Now to start loosening the gasket. Ideally, you want to have a helper on the other side to catch it, just in case, but I don't have one of those. Instead, you'll see that I have used some tape. Probably works just as well. I hope not to find out. It's already made some promising noises, so I will now try an advanced technique I saw on the internet. Well, I found out the tape works. Oh, but it does seem that 3 is about the absolute minimum. I'd say that's easier than a Mark II. Well, these pinch welds aren't quite disgusting, but they definitely need some work. I want to take care of all the window frames at once, and I think I'll do that before I address the quarter, in case I need to tweak it some more up here from my heavy-handed welding. Sidebar, I realize I forgot to add drain holes when I deleted the butt cheeks. Oh well. I think I'll take the seatbelt out and then move on to some other glass. I guess there's one at the top too. I don't know what I'm going to do for a headliner yet, but I did need to peel it anyway because all this sound deadening has mostly fallen off. I beat the ADHD this time. I was actually working on the seat belt. This rod just threads in at the top. There's no nut. Yay, learning. This is going to be in the entire way, so I guess I'll finish this quickly. And with the 5,000 lumen dome light reinstalled, we'll move swiftly along to this rear glass. And just like the quarter windows, some attention is needed. But to evaluate this mess here at the wiper arm, I already tried once and it seems to be smarter than me. Usually you get the nut off and then it's seized to the shaft, but I can't even get to the nut. Oh, I guess there is no nut on an earlier one. It's just a little spring tab. This won't be going back on, so it doesn't matter that much. Even that's bent. It's pretty clear that something just whacked it, broke the paint, and made a big dent. And that leaves just one piece of glass left in the car. This one. For once it's not cracked, but it is leaking and delaminating. And I'm sure there's some rust in that frame too, so it needs to come out anyways. Now I've never actually taken a windshield out intact before. So this should be an experience. Oh, it's not even really attached at the bottom. That's neat. Well, it's out and in the same number of pieces as when I started, but I can't really take credit. It was barely installed to begin with. There were two very different kinds of sealant in here. One I think was urethane. I have no idea what this road tar feeling stuff is. But at least I know why the floors in the front looked like they did. I'm going to try to clean this up. Give me a minute.
TCAS test failed.
Well, that was very tedious and miserable, but this windshield frame is in very nice shape. Few spots of surface rust, but nothing that needs welding. But now that my carpal tunnel is nice and aggravated, I don't need to touch this again for quite a while, so let's get back to the rear. Starting here on the drinker's side, there's a few pinholes I'll be able to weld up, but there's no getting around doing a patch right here, so I guess I'll do that then. Well, I drilled a hole in the duct for the outflow valve when I did that, so sorry, car. If you didn't know, pretty much every car has a little flapper valve that lets the air out when you shut the door so you don't feel it in your ears. Usually it's hidden behind a bumper or something, but on a 240 it's right here on the quarter. But I guess I'll get that out of the way. Well, on a 240 wagon it's here on the quarter. Forget where it is on a sedan. And after welding up some pinholes and giving it a polish, that's as good as I'm going to get it. That method isn't the most beautiful, but it is all made of metal again. On to the other side. I was able to pull most of the dent out with a slide hammer, but that metal is so thin and pitted that it was all kinds of wavy. And then I found all the pinholes, so here we are now. You've seen this before, you know what's going on. And with that and the window frame looking good enough for now, I can finish taking stuff apart back here. At least these screws aren't too rusty. I've also decided to take the hatch off now, so I'll finish grinding under there later. But this is also a good chance to complain about one of the very few baffling engineering decisions on a 240. All of the wires that go to the hatch are run through this hinge right here and are exposed to the elements. That has very predictable results after 40 years. That's one reason I want to get rid of the wiper, just fewer wires to run through right there. And with all those tangents out of the way, I can finally get back to the quarter. But not what I said I was going to do. I want to finish the welding before I try to get this nice and straight. As I mentioned, there's some holes I want to get rid of. These are some such holes. Of course, 240's, they all have a shiny chrome strip down the side. Those clips and the trim itself are getting pretty hard to find. And that makes for more holes for water to get in, so I'd rather them not be there. There's a bunch of holes back here by the bumper too I want to get rid of. The bumpers are going to be special and custom. We'll get to that. In the meantime, I got a little metal hole punch to make some circles. I guess I'll just weld them in. This time I think I'll say that went as well as expected, but also as well as hoped. The only unexpected headache were the two spot welds for the inner structure on the rear quarter. The factory trim would have originally covered those up. That's probably why it was there to begin with. Those will just have to get smoothed out when I finish that bodywork, maybe this video, we'll see. But with that, the shell and the fenders are now free of all the holes I wanted it to be free of, except the antenna on the A pillar and the washer on the C pillar. That's the D pillar. We might get to those. Oh, I also got rid of the holes on that rocker. You'll remember this rocker is new, I just left it blank. So it is now as symmetrical as a 240 wagon needs to be. Also, it's been like 4 months since I did all of that. I had to do this, but also ended up doing this and this and this and this. Mostly because I was procrastinating this. This being the only thing I know I'm going to get done in this video. As you can see, the engine bay looks like this. I would like it to be pretty again so I can start putting things in there. Of course, there are already many things in there, mostly wires and tubes that go behind the dash. So to get all of that out of the way, we need to begin by taking the dash out. But first, does this ever happen to you? Well, that must suck. SidewaysData is a combined motorsports registration and live timing program, and it has everything you might need to host an autocross, rallycross, rally, SCCA solo, or whatever. With SidewaysData, organizers can easily set up live timing and driver registration, either using your existing equipment or they can help you build a custom solution. The app handles driver registration and SCCA membership ID verification. Then afterwards, the event results get stored online and tied to driver profiles to keep track of stats and records and awards and what have you. No internet in the timing tent? That's fine. It's also designed to work in areas of low or poor reception, or you can just have a dedicated on-site server. During the event, you can keep track of all your drivers and their cars with a little QR code sticker to cut out some paperwork. You can also keep track of all your volunteers with built-in registration, notifications, file sharing, and contact information features, all of which I think are pretty nifty. So if you're looking to host an event where cargo zoom against clock, maybe check out SidewaysData.com. Thank you, SidewaysData, for sponsoring this video. Anyways. Oh, it didn't make me fight. That's nice. You'll see there's no tack in this cluster. Hopefully that will be corrected. And that dash pad obviously needs some work before it goes back in. We'll get to it. But now we can have a better look at what lives behind it. Like most cars, we have an HVAC box where the heater core and AC evaporator live. There's also a bunch of vents and a bunch of vacuum actuators, what turn the vents on and off depending on where you want to point your air. Unlike most cars, we'll see that the mechanics for the windshield wipers live in here. Also, unlike most cars, you'll see that it has this goofy cable-driven arrangement instead of linkages and pivots. Anyways, there's a bunch of stuff in there that probably needs some attention, so that whole thing needs to come out anyway. And normally I'll check the Baked Beans Garage YouTube channel for some guidance since I haven't done this before. But here it seems like I haven't done this before either. There is a lot of sheet metal back here. It's almost like Volvo would prefer to keep you alive in the event of an accident. They seem to be one of the first automakers to figure out you still have to be alive to buy another one. Oh, hello. I'd like to think not all of this rat's nest is factory, but I have no frame of reference. I heard a little hiss when I popped that last line off. Those white balls down there are a vacuum reservoir. Given how many years it's been since this thing last made a vacuum, that's fairly promising. And we'll have a look inside that nugget at a later date, but now there's just a few more wires and a brake booster to get out of the way. Also some insulation, I guess. Well, I guess I could stop there with the wires, but if you've been here a while, you know that all of the wires need to come out. Also, I already see a few that need new wires. You'd have a much better view if you came to this side, you know. You may have noticed these two black panels in the firewall. I assume they did it like that so they could use the same body stampings for left and right-hand drive cars. But from this little cutout, it looks like this main body harness went in at the same time as that. They're going to be easier to prep on the bench anyway, so I guess it'll come out at the same time as that. And with the steering column unplugged, it looks like I'll be able to pull everything out with it still attached to the panel, pedal box and all. Looks like I was correct. Just like I am every time, about 60% of the time. And with that, we're down to the last two things to get out of the way, then I can start thinking about paint. And not only are all three cables to the pedals affixed with pins, this arm is not splined and it only goes on, well, two ways. But still, Volvo, what a sensible automaker you are. Another unfortunate design feature of the 240, this cavity here is the scuttle. That's where the air comes in. That's also where a bunch of leaves and dirt come in. They're supposed to drain down through the rockers, but with the amount of detritus in here, it looks like they're not doing that. I bet this makes a mess. Well, that blew a whole bunch of junk all over the place. But now there's a lot of air coming down to the rocker when I do this. That's also what feeds the fresh air vent by your leg. Of course, this is a 60s design. It still has that. You may wonder why Volvo was still making a design from the 60s in the 80s. It's because they were still making it until the 90s. Like I said, Volvo just cared if you stayed alive in a crash. So their cars were just sturdy enough in the 60s, they were still sturdy enough in the 90s. Fun fact, from the factory, these have nickel copper brake lines and brass fittings. So they just come apart when you ask them to. I should have waited till the fourth one to say that. You just had to have a fun fact, huh? Now earlier I had blamed the windshield for the front floorboards not being entirely made of floor anymore. Now I can see it was definitely this seam sealer. But after a quick tidy and some polyurethane sealant, that should keep the floors made of floor. Anyways, back to the engine bay. Only now do I realize it would be a bit silly to leave the front subframe in. It's going to come out next time either way. So just to save the headache of overspray and masking, I'm just going to pop it out quickly. And one last bit of feature creep, I promise. 240s have a bunch of holes in the captain's side strut tower. I'd rather it didn't. Anyways, all that's left to do is to continue procrastinating with more talking. You saw all the prep and stuff, I don't need to explain that. I have now cleaned it about 7 times, so I guess it's time for my least favorite part of painting. Painting. For primer, I have the same cheap direct-to-metal epoxy primer I used on the 740 wagon. Worked well enough on that one. As for color, and the only thing that will be staying original on this rig, it will be Scotia Blue. Or at least as close as they could get to Scotia Blue, referencing the inside of the fuel door. I don't know, they wrote Scotia Blue on the can and it made me feel better. I only got a quart for now, we'll see. So I guess I'll just read the cans and hope this goes better than last time. So that was 1 coat of primer and then 3 coats of color. No clear coat, as this is a single stage urethane paint. I think I could claim that is for originality, but it's really because I don't want to deal with a clear coat. I don't have a paint booth, there's going to be some dust, so the fewer coats the better. A single stage paint also leaves more meat for the inevitable wet sanding and buffing. Then you don't have to worry about poking through a clear coat. I was a little worried this color wasn't going to be quite right, but that's definitely Scotia Blue. But with that, I'm ready to start putting things back into this end of the car. And I know I said multiple times now I'd get to working on those rear quarters in this video. However, as you may have predicted, because the only thing left in the car is the rear axle, when I took that front subframe out, the car became precariously tail heavy. There's a jack under there now, but I had to install some ballast. But given that and the very unfinished state of these front wheel wells, I think I'd rather finish taking the car apart so it's a completely bare shell, and then I can get the belly ready to start putting some suspension in next time. But like I said, all that's left is the axle, so this shouldn't take long. And with that, this brick is as empty as it's And with that, this brick is as empty as it's getting. As mentioned, I want to finish getting this behind end ready to put some stuff back in next time. And if you were here for the lift video, you'll remember I left most of this unfinished anyway, so it's time to finish that. And with the big tires, it is inevitable that this will be getting pelted with sticks and rocks and the bones of the bourgeoisie, so I need to protect my boy from that. Last time I did paint back here where the butt cheeks were, but I have changed my mind. Now I want to do that DTM epoxy primer just for adhesion. And then I have some acrylic urethane bed liner to go on top of it. And just like the factory rock chip coating, I'll do the rocker in bed liner as well as a strip here on the quarter, although that does entail finishing some of this bodywork. As per tradition, I explained way more than I needed to. This can just be a montage. Actually, I think there needs to be music for it to legally be a montage. I'm going to play some of this in real time so you can appreciate how excruciatingly long it takes. Also, I've been asked what these orange sticks are, so I'll tell you. These are phenolic scrapers, a non-marring scraper made for aerodynamic sealant on airplanes. Phenolic is basically a fiberglass composite but with paper instead of glass. They are kind of pricey because aviation, but they do a really good job at not gouging your metal. Also, you can sharpen them with a wood rasp, and they last quite a long time. Not very ergonomic either, but worth it. Now to finish this shape, before I do the bed liner, I need some filler. Of course, my goal was to not have any filler, but my sheet metal skills aren't quite there yet. For the first and probably thickest layer, I will use some fiberglass reinforced filler. There is a lot of discourse around whether you should put filler directly to metal or put epoxy primer down first. But given that the argument seems to be split straight down the middle, I'm going to assume that it doesn't really matter. The can says to put it straight to metal, so that's what I'll do. And you may know me to be a bit cavalier with my use of PPE, but fiberglass is just dyed asbestos, so I don't want that in me. I also got one of these. We'll see how that goes. As you can see, I ended up roughing in the entire quarter. I'll have the primer out, so I may as well. This bare primer will suck up moisture from the atmosphere, and since I won't be getting back to bodywork for a few months, it'll be nice to have some primer on there. Also, this little crease is going to be a nightmare to get just right, so I'll put that off until it's time for paint. Of course, you don't want filler right up to a body line. That's why I took so much time making this entire arch reveal out of metal. Didn't have much of an option back there at the bottom of the quarter. Obviously, that's going to turn into a rusty nightmare if water ever gets behind that filler, hence the bed liner. Speaking of filler, I'm quite a fan of this straight line sander doohickey because it sands in a straight line. That seems to save quite a lot of time block sanding. Of course, it'll still need to be finished with a regular old block, but this does a much better job of keeping the panel flat and straight than the orbital. As for the blocks, in the block sanding, I like to use these Dura blocks. They're a bit pricey, but they work extremely well so long as you don't cheap out on your sandpaper. They also flex just enough to make me feel like I'm doing a good job. But the real reason I bring them up is so we can all have a chuckle at the absolutely deranged graphic design of the box they come in. Who is that for? Anyways, back to this. I now have the front wheel wells, the rockers, the rear wheel wells, the bottom of the rear quarter, and the entire belly back here, ready for some epoxy primer and then bed liner. So I guess I'll mask some stuff and then spray some stuff. Well, that was very satisfying to do, so I figured I'd shut up a while and let it be satisfying to watch too. Also, I got sick and I was hoping my voice would be better by now, but here we are. I also sprinkled in some terrible acoustics and a bad camera angle just for spice. Anyways, that was 2 coats of primer and then 2 coats of bed liner. I left the primer for a day in between so I could do some polyurethane sealant in some places where I felt like it. But with all that done, it looks rather delicious under here. This bed liner sets up real nice and hard, what with it being an acrylic urethane. Also a big fan of this slightly glossy avocado peel texture. But that hardness, and hopefully in turn durability, also brings up the issue of rust. If rust ever does start somewhere up there, this will just hold it in and make it worse. But that was the point of the primer and the sealant. Hopefully it won't start. Hopefully. If it does, I will have learned something. And right now, after a few days, it is plenty hard enough to caress lovingly, but it's going to take quite a while for it to cure completely. It's still not exactly balmy in here. It is not ideal to be doing this in the dead of winter, but it's actually fairly economical to keep it almost warm in here. All I had to do was spend several $1,000s on insulation. Sidebar, just as I and the comment section predicted, the intercooler on the exhaust of my little diesel heater did clog up eventually. I did get a full winter out of it last year, but this year I just can't seem to get it clean enough for it to run normally anymore. I then tried the spaghetti tube as a heat exchanger, but that clogged up after not even a day. So now I am running the danger loop, and it kind of works well. But back to the subject at hand. While the primer was still wet, I noticed that the quarters actually don't look that terrible, so those probably won't be too miserable to finish out. I guess that was my only observation. So to conclusion, that all went as well as I could have reasonably hoped, and now I have a very solid empty brick to start sprinkling some money and effort into. Next time, I think I'll give it some suspension and some brakes. Then after that, maybe it can have an engine and transmission. Also, it needs all of the other things a car could possibly need, so we'll get to it. Some things I didn't get to in this video: there's still that patch of gross on the hatch, and all 4 doors are still perforated, as are the front and rear valances. What are you going to do about it? If you're still here, I do appreciate you watching. I ask you support the channel by clicking the buttons and typing words down there and whatnot. If you really like my face and my voice, you can support me on Patreon and see some random sporadic behind the beans content. Thank you to my current Patreon supporters. I love you very much. I have to pause for so long now. There's so many of you. And thanks again, SidewaysData, for sponsoring this video. A few days after I upload it, I will also have more shirts and more stickers. There is the brown with tractor, and there is the teal with bean can. The car in the bean can is a Scotia blue wagon, as it has always been. I don't have this batch of stickers yet, but this is what they will look like. I am Chinchilla, and this has been Baked Beans Garage. I will see you next time.